evening and welcome back to Checkpoint. We're happy to have you with us. Tonight we are talking about the hard, tough economic times, the new taxation that's now in place, the 8% on petroleum products. You have a litre of kerosene retailing at 18 shillings. You also have those taxes and levies around mobile bank transactions and many others. Tonight I'm hosting the Cabinet Secretary Treasury, that's Henry Rotich. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And let's start, with these taxes that have just recently come into effect, because many Kenyans, when Jiko seated back at home, is asking, my income has not increased, but here I have to spend a little bit more, pay out a little bit more, and I don't understand why. What do you tell these Kenyans?
Well, thank you for having me here. The main tax that came on board recently is the VAT on petroleum products. As you know, this is a tax that was passed by members of parliament in 2013. It's only that it did not come on board immediately because its implementation was delayed to 2016 initially. Then later on, it was moved another 2 years till it came to effect 1st of September. So it's a tax that was supposed to have been implemented much earlier, but it was delayed, and now it came to board. And we did that in 2013 when we reviewed the entire VAT law, where we wanted to modernize the law, less exemptions, exempt only products consumed by the poor, and which are also on zero rate what is exported.
Yeah.
So that was the principle of that tax. So it has just come on board. It could have come on board in 2013, but it was delayed because probably prices were high of petroleum products at that particular time, and that is why it delayed. So it was a tax that was going to happen anyway.
And you're saying they were under exemption because they affect a big majority of the poor. But now you're seeing 8% still is an increase, but it has a ripple effect. It's not only the petroleum products, the cost of living. We've seen whether it's transportation, goods. We've been speaking to Kenyans. Many have been tweeting in, venting online as well. It's affected the entire cost of living, so that it's not just one product. If you're in a matatu or you're fueling your car, it's affecting all others. And then kerosene, 18 shillings. Again, most poor households, that 18 shillings per litre, that's what they use. So are we looking to shield?
The knock-on effects, yes, has had some economic-wide effects.
Yes.
And you may have seen that inflation on Friday actually edged up to 5.7, but because it reflected the full effect of 16%. Obviously, with the reduction from 16 to 8, inflation in October, I believe, should not go up as it was when it went at 16. So, yes, there was one-off. This is a one-off effect, but as you know, it had to reflect the 16 because that came into effect on 1st of September. On the issue of kerosene. The issue of kerosene, as indicated in the finance bill, this is a tax, what we are calling anti-adulteration tax. If you know that every month we export roughly between 30 to 35 million liters of kerosene, almost 80% of that is actually being adulterated by mixing it with diesel, and it's used by automobiles. Just around 5 million liters is actually used by household. But we've had other interventions, particularly the LPG gas that now is available in a subsidized manner.
But in this budget, funding to LPG last mile project that would be alternatives has diminished.
Well, there is still money for LPG in the budget.
Less money.
Yes, but we want to continue to fund because we have also put other incentives for the private sector to invest in LPG.
Okay.
It's only, this was just to trigger government to begin to invest in LPG. But largely, this is really a private sector endeavor, and we have provided the necessary incentives for the private sector to actually introduce LPGs to the country, and already it's happening. The last mile connectivity, this is already done wonders. Almost many Kenyans are now connected, and so with those interventions, we see the use of kerosene going down significantly. In any case, it's a very harmful, product, and that is why the strategy really is to give Kenyans an alternative use of fuel, which is, in terms of health-wise, it is something that is good for health, and also LPG and electricity is now available.
Let me put it to you this way. Some have argued that those who've been using kerosene will probably go back to more environmental damaging methods, charcoal, like we've seen in the past, because this was an easy way in as far as dealing with the unscrupulous individuals that are adulterating fuel, diesel mixing with kerosene. But the other day, just last week, I believe, there was a story about diesel being mixed with water. So that this is not a solution to deal with those people. We're still hurting those 5 million you've mentioned, liters that take that are using kerosene. And because there's no increased funding to LPG, to last mile projects, so the alternative they'll take is the lesser one. So how are we cushioning Wanjiko?
As I indicated, the government was intervening with the LPG, but majority of the provision of LPG will be done by the private sector. So you may have just seen a 1 billion cuts, but there is still money in the budget. But largely, we want the private sector to do this work. The issue of kerosene by the poor, we don't expect people now to go to the firewood and all that, because we have put measures on people now can access electricity in the rural areas. We are making solar alternative sources like solar, LPGs are becoming widely available. I think it is just an issue that we want to get the public to be aware that there are alternative methods, and which already, as we've seen, the private, the households are already taking on board. So the effects of adulterations are actually worse than what we have currently, because...
But they're still now mixing it with water. They're just becoming more creative.
Well, sooner or later, they'll be caught up on that. But the biggest challenge was that they were mixing it with diesel. What was happening is that it was affecting automobiles, and again, our products that we were exporting to our neighboring countries was not getting, we were not getting markets anymore, because there was fear that our fuel is already adulterated. So we were actually losing first the export market, and again, the consumers of fuel were actually suffering in terms of the effect on the vehicles that they're using.
And perhaps one would seek that there be found another way to punish and ensure that adulteration does not happen without punishing the poor households. The housing tax, the 1.5, some took to Twitter to ask the basic question. So I'm renting a house, but I'm building a house for somebody else. Clarify that for us, because also there are those who see it as discriminative in that it's those that are on payroll that are paying this tax only.
Well, first, as I indicated to you earlier, it's not 15%.
No, it's 1.5. That was the Naira in the cartoon.
Contribution. Take this as a contribution, not a tax. I think there is also confusion about it. This is an employee contributing 1.5% and the employer contributing 1.5%, make it 3%. And this goes to the National Housing Development Fund. Now, the private sector, according to the strategy that we are working on for affordable housing, is that the private sector will build the houses. The National Housing Fund will off-take those houses with the resources that the contributors will be making. And then they will be allocated houses based on a criteria that is going to be determined. It could be first come, first serve, or lottery arrangement, whatever will be adopted.
So these houses will be given to some people based on some arrangement that's yet to be agreed
Basically,
on?
the contributors only, not everybody.
So I will get a house?
Yes, you'll be contributing, obviously. So as a contributor, you will be given priority based on the criteria that they are going to adopt.
So it's not assured that everybody will get a house. It's a criteria that they will devise.
Yeah. You see, what will happen is that we need something like 500,000 houses, or the shortfall of affordable houses annually is in the tune of about 200,000 houses. Not everybody who wants affordable houses will get it at the same time. But in the long term, as people continue to contribute, they will obviously, we will ensure that most people get houses, especially those who are contributing. But at the initial stage, obviously, you will have to find a way to prioritize that, and with time, as more affordable houses come, everybody who is contributing will obviously have a chance to own a house.
Why does it sound like we're jumping quickly to start deducting, and there's no strategy yet that then you sell to Kenyans? You tell them, this is how much we want to deduct, this is how we intend to do this, so that there's not misinformation and people feeling, okay, we're being taxed, there's some houses which will be built, I'm renting, so who's going to get that house? You get that kind of concern, panic about no real clear strategy?
Yeah, for now.
And that this is a devolved function. Housing is a devolved function.
Okay, I'll come to the devolved issue. Well, you're renting now because you can't get affordable houses, or own a house because they are expensive at the moment. But with this strategy of getting the private sector to build, and we are doing that by unlocking the supply side constraints that are there currently. Government is providing land, it's going to service that land, private sector will come in to build, and this fund that we are building is to guarantee the private sector is building the houses that they will be taken up. So once the fund takes them up, it now allocates based on the criteria that's going to be set, and not everybody will get in year one, obviously, because the number of affordable houses to be built in year one will not satisfy everybody.
On the devolution?
And obviously, it will happen with time.
Yeah.
That is why maybe first there will be a lottery or first come, first serve. Those are already being worked out. Yeah. Look, housing is really, I would say, a concurrent function, so to speak. The national government has the housing policy function, and the policy now is to get everybody get shelter. By the way, it is in the Constitution.
It is in the Constitution
that every Kenyan is entitled to decent shelter. How would government achieve that? The big challenge we have is that we do not have people producing affordable houses as we speak now. The market is tilted towards the upmarket and all that. And then you've had a lot of Kenyans now living in slums and all other areas. So we want every Kenyan to get an house that is decent.
And I hear you.
And this is a strategy that has worked everywhere. You know,
so why don't you work with the counties? Because it's a function of
we are working with counties, by the way. This is not a Nairobi issue.
But it's supposed to be undertaken by the county governments. Why is the national government?
We are working together. We are working together. I'll give you an example. Like in Uasin Gishu already, the governor has already earmarked the land, surfaced, and the private sector will build. There are about 17 or 20 counties that have already signed off. Just like what we did with the medical equipment leasing. We work with the counties. So this is...
Although there was opposition in some quarters.
Always there is an opposition, something, but what has happened now, it has turned out to be a very good intervention. So even this one, and as I said, it's going to be done by the private sector. So wherever county we are going to do these houses, there will be a private sector to invest in that.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So these taxes, because we're talking about a deficit, and there's austerity measures as well that the president spoke about. The deficit, we understand, is 600 billion shillings.
575.
575, roughly 600. The austerity measures the president talked about is about 55 billion that will be saved. How much are you raising from these taxes, the new ones, roughly?
Well, we expect to raise something like 48 billion.
So 48, let's say 50 plus the 55 on austerity, roughly 100.
Yes.
We still have a 500 billion shillings deficit. So how is that going to be?
Well, let me correct you. 575 is what we have, even with these interventions. Yeah, that was a deficit we had programmed. Yeah, know that we are coming from a much higher deficit. Yeah, 600 and something. Now we are bringing it down gradually to 575 and gradually to below 400. In terms of percent of GDP, this year we are targeting 5.7% of GDP, and we are coming down from 7%. So the fiscal strategy or the plan we have is to progressively bring down the deficit to levels that will ensure our debt continues to remain sustainable. We have, since independence, by the way, we have never run a surplus. So, because our expenditures are always higher than revenues. That's where the gap we are talking about. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of what size of gap we are looking at. It's not to eliminate the gap, because that gap is filled by borrowing. But you borrow in a manner that it remains sustainable. It doesn't put you into duress. It doesn't put you in a manner that will, bankrupt the country, basically. Right. So that's when we say debt is sustainable, is that it is a debt that does not threaten the country into insolvency.
There are many economic analysts who would completely disagree, Mr. CS, on the sustainability, and they feel that we're living beyond our means. And I want us to talk about the borrowing, the debt we have, the expenditure, the wage bill, when we return from this break, as well as the president's assertion that it's devolution that's driving the high cost of the budget and what we must fund. So we'll be back, as well as read some of your questions and get the responses from the CS. Please stay with us.